Hi, I am Cameron Bertuzzi, and welcome to Capturing Christianity. Today we're talking about who should Christians vote for in 2020, the election coming up on November 3rd. It's not too long away as of this recording, and so I've brought on Dr. Michael Brown, who's just recently written a book on this subject, or something related, very related to the subject, so we'll get to that in just a second. I've also invited Dr. Dustin Crummett, who's been on the channel. He's a Christian philosopher. Let me go ahead and just do my introductions. I don't want to waste a lot of time. We've got about an hour for this dialogue to happen, so let me just briefly introduce my guests, and we're going to get right into dialogue. Michael Brown, he was born on March 16, 1955. The reason why I bring that up is because he and I share a birthday, March 16. 316, you were telling me in the Skype chat that there's a lot of good 316 verses, which is true. He's a radio host, author, apologist, professor, and noted proponent of Messianic Judaism, Christian Zionism, and the Charismatic movement. He holds a PhD in Near Eastern languages and literature from New York University. So this is the important part as it relates to this stream. In June of 2020, he released a book entitled Evangelicals at the Crossroads, Will We Pass the Trump Test?, in which he argues he presents both the pro-Trump and anti-Trump positions, laying out the challenges that evangelicals face if we are to pass the Trump test. I highly recommend picking up the book, especially if you like what you hear today from Dr. Brown. Dustin Crummett, he's a friend of Capturing Christianity. He's been on a bunch. He's working on animal ethics as a postdoctoral researcher at the Ludwig Maximilian University of Munich. He received a PhD from the University of Notre Dame in 2018, and he specializes in social and political philosophy, ethics, and the intersection of these two fields, and philosophy of religion. That's the one that really interests us here at Capturing Christianity. So we don't do a whole lot of political dialogues like this. You're not going to expect a whole lot of this, but I think it's important to at least do something like this every now and then so we can get some more clarity and perspectives on the different choices that we have here and just get more informed. All right, so welcome to the show, guys. Thank you guys for doing this.
Great to be here.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
All right, so let's start with Dustin. So the format of this basically is this. We're going to do about 15-minute openers and then just dialogue for the rest of the time. So Dustin has some slides prepared, and then right after that, we'll get to Michael's opening, and then we'll just, like I said, do some open dialogue. So Dustin, whenever you're ready, I'll go ahead and share the screen here.
All right. Is it up?
Yep, there you go.
All right, great. So I have very serious problems with the Democrats, with Biden in particular. Yet sometimes you have to sort of strategically ally with your enemies. And I want to argue that if you're in a state that's competitive, you should vote for Biden and pretty much vote straight ticket Democrat. I'm not, in my remarks, going to say very much about abortion, Israel, et cetera, some of the topics I expect Michael to discuss. I figure that we'll cover that in discussion. My argument is going to be quite simple. So I think the main socio-political concerns of the Bible center around justice and care for poor, marginalized, vulnerable people, and I think that Democrats are better on this front. Citations are going to be in hyperlinks, and I think Cameron can maybe post the slides on the video, or I'll tweet them out, and then people can follow up if they want. So I want to begin with a very sobering statistic. In recent decades, the number of Americans who die what are called deaths of despair, deaths from alcohol abuse, drug abuse, or suicide, has increased from 65,000 to 158,000. This is driven by an increase among working class Americans, mostly white people, I can talk about that, without college degrees. And there isn't any similar increase in most other countries. So there's something about the American system that's causing this. There's a recent very good book people should read called Deaths of Despair and the Future of Capitalism. It's by Ann Case and Angus Deaton. The latter won a Nobel Prize in economics. And they argue that this rise in deaths of despair is because of economic instability and the sort of accompanying breakdown of communities, families, churches, et cetera. The weakening position of labor, the growing power of corporations, a rapacious healthcare sector. So let's talk about these things. In recent decades, the economy has grown tremendously, but almost all of the growth has gone to people at the top. Wages for white men without college degrees have actually decreased by 13%. You can see from this graph on the side, according to this estimate, the share of wealth held by the top 1% has increased by $21 trillion, while the bottom 50% of people their wealth has gone down by $900 billion to actually be negative. So, by the way, anything else I say where you think, how are we going to pay for that? That's the answer. Now, ultimately, my view is that what we need are sort of Bernie-style social democratic policies of the sort that you find in all these other countries that don't have this problem. Biden is not going to go as far as that, but he is going to do some things that help people, increasing taxes on the wealthy, increasing the minimum wage, et cetera. I'll note that both Goldman Sachs and Moody's Analytics, neither of these are like socialist propaganda firms, predict significantly stronger economies under Biden with, as a quote from Moody's, more of the benefits from the stronger economy under Biden's policies going to workers. Now, people sometimes say, but Trump showed that Republican economic policies helped because the economy grew a lot and that helped everybody. And the answer is no, that's not true. Economic growth under Trump followed exactly the trends that were begun in Obama's second term. So you can see here, GDP, just a straight line, unemployment rate leveled out a bit, wages, straight line, poverty rate, straight line. What Trump's policies have done is ensure that more of the economic growth went to the people at the top. Economic inequality has hit a new high. Right now, for the first time in American history, billionaires pay a lower effective tax rate than working class people do. Trump's policies are going to exacerbate this. He wants to cut the capital gains tax. And the current recovery from the COVID recession is the most unequal economic recovery in modern American history. Let's change gears a bit and talk about healthcare. So the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office estimated that the Republican replacement for Obamacare was going to result in around 20 million people losing health insurance. Now, that would kill somewhere between 18 and 28,000 people a year. I can talk about how that estimate was arrived at. It would result in worse health for millions more people, contribute to the 500,000 medical bankruptcies that happen in the US every year. It would probably increase the abortion rate a bit because the ACA expanded contraception access. Now, that legislative effort failed, but the Supreme Court may very well strike down Obamacare. There's a new case that they're going to hear after the election, and which party is in control of the White House and Congress is going to determine what happens at that point. This also ties back into the wage stagnation and deaths of despair issue, because healthcare costs have ballooned in the US in a way that they have not in other countries, from 5% of GDP to 18% of GDP. And when you have a system of employer-provided health insurance, what that means is that your total compensation, including your benefits, can go up while your wages go down because the insurance company gets more of your money. Now, it's totally possible for the US to have high-quality universal health care, which is affordable and which is free at the point of care. That's what we have in Germany. We spend half of what the US does. We have better health outcomes. We have zero medical bankruptcies. But this requires government intervention to set price controls and to make sure that everybody's covered. Biden is not going to go as far as needed, but he does want, for instance, a public option, some measures to combat market concentration, et cetera, which will move us in the right direction. The problem for workers is not purely economic. They also need better conditions, less precarious employment. Biden has been pretty good on this front. For instance, he supports a bill called the Protecting the Right to Organize Act, which will strengthen protections for unions, for workers' rights. Trump's National Labor Relations Board, on the other hand, has made a long string of sort of anti-union, anti-worker decisions. People can look up what they've done. If we change gears a little bit and talk about global health, I think one of the very best things that the US government does is to fight preventable and treatable diseases in developing nations. And Biden's record here is pretty good. So for instance, he played a very important role when he was the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee in implementing PEPFAR, which was George Bush's AIDS relief program. This is a graphic from the State Department, which of course Donald Trump runs. You can see by their estimate, over 16 or 17 years, PEPFAR has saved 18 million lives, resulted in almost 3 million babies being born without HIV, hundreds of thousands of healthcare workers being trained. Trump has repeatedly tried to slash funding for PEPFAR and for other similar global health initiatives. I think that's really bad. So far, Congress hasn't done it, but who knows what will happen in the future. Something bad that Trump has done is implement a very restrictive version of what's called the Mexico City policy. What this does is it prohibits the government from giving public health funds to any organization which provides information about abortion, essentially, referrals, information about the procedure, et cetera, even if the funds themselves are not being used for something related to abortion. It's not about whether the US will fund abortions, and this applies to foreign organizations, foreign NGOs, by the way. It's not about whether the US is going to fund abortions. That's illegal on other grounds. It's about whether, say, if you have a clinic, just a normal health clinic, in which if somebody walks in and asks about an abortion, you'll give a referral or whatever, whether you can get U.S. government funds. Now, there is no deontological principle which says that you can't fund organizations that also do other bad things independently of your funding. So, for instance, if you thought that you were required to never support any organization that promoted abortion, even if your support wasn't going to the abortion, that would require cutting off our aid to the Israeli government, which publicly funds abortion. And I think that Dr. Brown wouldn't support that. On the other hand, when we look at the consequences of this policy, first of all, it disrupts lots of other health services that are provided by these clinics and different organizations. But there's a big literature suggesting that it significantly increases the global abortion rate because it decreases contraceptive access. So from sort of everybody's perspective, I think this is really a disastrous policy. Speaking of global health, there's a big pandemic. Trump has done very bad. I'm happy to talk about why that is. I'll just say the U.S. right now has one of the highest per capita death rates in the world. If the U.S. death rate was the same as it is in Germany, 181,000 fewer people would have died. And the brunt of this has been borne by poor people and racial minorities. Let's talk about pollution. So air pollution alone kills somewhere between 1 and 200,000 Americans every year. A lot of science on this. Causes a lot more illnesses, other problems, chronic illnesses. Most of the pollution is created by wealthy people, of course, but the costs are borne by racial minorities and the poor. That's unjust. Both parties need to do better, but Biden is at least suggesting, for instance, investment in clean energy, whereas Trump is rolling back EPA regulations, promoting the use of coal, et cetera. Let's talk about another environmental issue, global warming. Overwhelming scientific consensus in favor of man-made global warming. Trump has withdrawn from the Paris Accords, again, promoted coal use. He's lowered vehicle emission standards. Biden has done a lot of the opposite things. Now, in coming decades, we're going to see rising sea levels, extreme weather, extreme temperatures, droughts in some areas, excessive rainfall in others, and that's going to increase waterborne diseases, disruption in the food supply, massive displacement, ocean acidification, which is as bad as it sounds. Again, wealthy nations are creating the CO2, they're releasing the CO2, but poor people are going to bear the cost of this. So this quote is from a WHO report, which suggests that the total burden of disease due to climate change appears to be borne mainly by children in developing countries. Hundreds of millions of people might get displaced. Hundreds of millions of people might face hunger. I read the other day a paper from the National Bureau of Economic Research, extremely respected nonpartisan economic think tank, which predicts that extreme temperatures alone may kill 6, 7, 8 million people a year at the end of the century if we don't reduce emissions. Right now, climate change is already contributing to wars and instability in places like Syria. Now, there is uncertainty about what will happen. Of course, maybe things will be better than I'm suggesting. But first of all, a lot of the stuff you do to fight global warming should be done anyway, like reducing coal. But also, the uncertainty cuts both ways. So worst case scenarios are ones where we hit what are called cascading climate tipping points. People can look up what that means. And we destroy civilization. So John Schellenhuber, who is one of the world's foremost climate scientists, he's German, done a bunch of prestigious stuff. He thinks that if we do the wrong things, the human species will survive somehow, but we will destroy almost everything we've built up over the last 2,000 years. I am pretty sure. There's even a small chance that he's right about that, then I think that we need to take this very seriously, particularly when, again, other people are the ones who are going to bear the cost of this in most cases. This is the final main point I want to hit. There's no very nice way to put this, but Republicans are essentially an anti-democratic, in the small d sense, party, which rules largely by disenfranchising minorities. So in the past 30 years, a Republican presidential candidate has only gotten the most votes one time. Republicans hold so much power because the Electoral College and the Senate are skewed in a way which, not by design, but in practice, gives more power to white voters, since they're more likely to live in these rural states. But Republicans also rely on gerrymandering, voter suppression, these things largely aimed at disenfranchising black voters. I'll talk about just one anecdote. There are out of many. So some years ago, North Carolina passed this voter ID law ostensibly to prevent voter fraud. Don Yelton, who was a precinct chair, gave an interview on The Daily Show. You can find the video. And he revealed the real motives. He said, this law is going to kick the Democrats in the butt. If it hurts a bunch of whites, so be it. If it hurts a bunch of lazy blacks that want the government to give them everything, so be it. What do you want me to say? Later on, this law was struck down by a federal court for targeting African Americans with almost surgical precision. And the bigger picture issue here is this. The need for undemocratic measures aimed at disenfranchising people for Republicans is going to increase over time because the country is getting less white and young people are getting less conservative. So at some point, either the Republican Party has to really change course or it has to go sort of competitive authoritarian in a way. And I think that Trump's lies about voter fraud, his recent attempts to have his political opponents arrested, discussions with state legislatures about directly appointing electors regardless of vote totals, all of those are worrisome here. I don't know what will happen, but I think the safest route for democracy is to repudiate all of this overwhelmingly. There are a lot of other issues that I would like to talk about. Foreign policy, the civilian casualties have greatly increased under Trump. Immigration, Trump has decreased the number of refugees admitted in the US from 110,000 to 18,000 every year. There's no reason to do that. I want to keep the discussion manageable, so I'm not going to get into those so much. But just to bring things back around, the argument I wanted to make was that what we should care about primarily is the impact of social policy on poor people, vulnerable people, marginalized people. I really do think that the effect of right-wing policies in the short to medium term is to cause the deaths of tens or hundreds of thousands of people every year, to subject millions more to suffering and injustice, to threaten our democracy, the stability of our social institutions, with the brunt being borne by poor and marginalized people. And I think that the effect of right-wing policies in the long term, largely because of environmental issues and climate change, is potentially to threaten tens or hundreds of millions of lives, again, largely people, poor people living in other countries who have nothing to do with the environmental damage that we've caused, and maybe even is to threaten our civilization. So there's a lot more that I would like to say and that I could say, but that's sort of a quick overview of some important considerations that I think bear on this election. So.
All right, so now what we're going to do is turn to Michael Brown, and he's going to have 15 minutes as well. And what this is going to be structured as is he's going to actually respond to some of the things that Justin said here, as well as give a sort of opening. So, Michael, whenever you're ready.
Yeah, thanks for the time, Dustin. Thanks for your presentation. And I have to say from the heart, deeply, I believe that the key, most important issues in God's sight have been terribly, terribly overlooked, and that we're looking at horrific bloodshed, things that God cares about very, very deeply, that are happening, in fact, with a potential administration that would be the most radically pro-abortion in America's history. And to put theory and what might happen and questions about debate about science, even on the same list with the ongoing slaughter of the unborn, to me is missing the heart of God entirely. Now, I don't have any notes or slides to put up. I thought we were just having a back and forth discussion for an hour and found out, I guess last night, that Dr. Crummett would be making a formal presentation. But what I'm going to do, rather than a standard debate format of opening comments, is take the time to lay out my position and then begin interacting with the points that Dr. Crummett made to prepare the way for our back and forth. So when you go through Scripture, you see that one of the reasons God would destroy whole nations was the shedding of the blood of children. And the attack on the most vulnerable is nowhere more clearly seen than in the attack on the unborn. Even with all the progress we've made, we're still talking about roughly 750,000 babies slaughtered in the womb every year, the great majority based on convenience. Joe Biden has now changed his views because he's primarily a figurehead for an increasingly radicalized Democratic Party. And he has said that he no longer supports the Hyde Amendment. Joe Biden is partnering with Kamala Harris. She has voted against the Born Alive Protection Act. So if a baby survives abortion, guaranteeing it medical care, she has voted against that. Under no circumstances can a Christian say, I'm voting for that person as potential president. And we have to recognize that a Harris presidency is very realistic given Biden's age and potential fragility. She has voted against the Pain-Capable Abortion Act. So when a baby is capable of feeling pain, that you can't abort. She's voted against that. Under no circumstances could I possibly countenance voting for people who've made it known where their policies will be. The possibility of packing the courts. Joe Biden has also said that if the Supreme Court should overturn Roe v. Wade, then he would then make it the law of the land. And if you have Democrats winning the Senate completely, then you could actually have something like that happen. Decades and decades of pro-life work, of tears, of sacrifice, of getting states to change their policies would be thrown out in a moment of time. And when you look at the massive piles of the bodies of the unborn, when you look at the so-called products of conception, when you look at the horror of what states like New York and Virginia have done, saying that abortion is legal for any reason, right up to the last moment, a woman could say, I just can't have this baby. And rather than say, okay, you have to give it up for adoption, you're about to deliver, that baby could be slaughtered. That alone is enough to bring judgment on an entire nation. And when you look at, well, if healthcare changed, maybe 28,000 Americans would die. And even those numbers are going to be hotly debated. This we can't debate. This we cannot debate. And when you look at justices appointed by President Trump, not just Supreme Court, now the potential of Amy Coney Barrett, but 200 plus in the federal courts, much good has been done on many, many, many fronts. We could lose this now, or we could push forward and see a real chance to turn things for life. I believe that's one of the last strings of mercy that we're hanging on to as we battle for the lives of the unborn. Freedom of religion is a massively important issue as well. We know where Joe Biden stands. For example, he said trans rights are the civil rights of the day. That means that your kids in school, 15-year-old girl would have to play ball with a 15-year-old boy. A school that didn't go along with that would lose its federal funding. That was the Obama policy. Share the locker room, share the bathroom. Trump administration thankfully undid that. Trump administration fighting back against Democratic senators and mayors who have discriminated against churches during COVID-19. I care about the world that I hand over to my kids and my grandkids and great-grandkids potentially. And looking at a situation where freedom of religion is under constant assault, the rising radicalism of the Democrat Party, even Biden having to shift left further and further to gain the election and to defeat Bernie Sanders. It is the BLM war on the nuclear family. It is mobocracy. It is the cancel culture. It is a dangerous socialism. I'm not talking about economic policies. I'm talking about anarchist, anti-God policies. There's a reason in Portland that protesters went from burning city buildings and burning police precincts to burning Bibles. And that's why churches have been burned and synagogues have been vandalized. It's an anti-God movement. It's basically a vote for Trump or a vote for mobocracy and the cancel culture. That's just the way it's going. Standing with Israel is very important. We're talking about how Christians should vote. Very important in God's sight. Trump actually moves the embassy. Trump actually brokers peace policy. Look, we've never had two policies like this in 1 year. We went from 1948 to 1979 before there was the first peace treaty with Egypt, and then until 1995 with Jordan. Now, 25 years later, we have two. These are massively important developments. Trump is also standing up to the Islamic terror of Iran, the disastrous policy we have with Iran that could easily give them nuclear capabilities. He's pushing back against that very, very strongly. And therefore, Arab nations are saying, hey, let's stand with Israel and America against Iran, against Turkey. He's pushing back against the tyranny of China, whereas Joe Biden would basically be in bed with China in many, many different ways. I was picked up in Australia when speaking earlier this year. My driver was an Australian citizen who was from China. His parents still live in China. He came to Australia to study, ended up becoming a citizen. And I asked him, what's your take on the Chinese leadership now? He goes, very, very dangerous. I said, what's your take on Trump? He said, he's a hero. That's how the folks in Hong Kong and others, the protesters, look at him. At last, someone willing to stand up to this worldwide tyranny. These things are very important to God as well. Also, when it comes to other aspects of LGBTQ activism and extremism, we care for every individual. As Christians, we say Jesus died for every individual. We want everyone treated equally under the law. But we know where the Biden-Harris administration would go. And when we come back to religious liberties, when we come back to abortion, and then put all these things together, we've already seen what Kamala Harris would do as Attorney General. When David Daleiden, the Center for Medical Progress, exposed Planned Parenthood's barbarous practice of selling babies, aborted parts of babies, even cases that were documented where babies that were alive, were still alive, had brains cut out. I mean, utter horrors Horrors. You couldn't even portray it in a movie. What did she do? She authorized a raid on Biden's house, standing with Planned Parenthood to get the videos. I mean, this is the type of administration that we would be dealing with. So these are some of the strong reasons why, as much as I dislike much about Donald Trump, as much as I find him to be divisive, as much as I find him to be harmful and negative for the larger national discourse, as much as I find his behavior often off-putting, as much as I believe that he often lies and exaggerates, that to me it's a no-brainer in terms of a vote between the two. When it was during the primaries, I very much opposed Donald Trump in 2016, pretty much picking any of the other Republican candidates ahead of him. And one of my issues was I didn't believe him for a split second. I didn't think he'd keep his promises, especially to conservative Christians, evangelicals. I felt fairly confident, very confident that once he was elected with our help, that he'd spit us out. He's done the exact opposite. He surrounded himself by committed Christians of all race and of all ethnicity. And every one of them that speaks to me that has met with him tells me about his genuine concern for all Americans and his desire to make the country a better place for everyone. Fact of the matter is, he is who he is, so things are going to come in a narcissistic way, and Trump's going to be in the middle of it. But bottom line is, his interests are what's best for America, and I agree with those. To paint him as a racist, misogynist, Islamophobe, etc., go down the list is to not understand what's really going on. Some of the specifics then that were brought up, the idea that you ally with your enemies, not when your enemies are doing this, not when your enemies are shedding the blood of the innocent and standing for it and making clear that they will do everything they can to stop those who are pro-life by legislating Roe v. Wade or doing the types of things Kamala Harris did as Attorney General. No, you sit out the election. I could see that. You cast a protest vote. I could see that. But under no moral guidelines, Christian guidelines, biblical guidelines, could I imagine in 100 years casting a vote for Biden-Harris. The idea that Democrats are better for the poor, I mean, that could be hotly disputed. It could be very, very strongly argued that going back to Lyndon Johnson's civil rights rulings or economic policies, that the welfare policies, as many of Black has said, first you had our bodies as slaves, now you have our votes. That all it's done is enslave more Democrats, more Black Americans. When you look at cities that are controlled, that have been controlled for years and years and years by Democrats, it's often the worst for the poor. It's often the worst for minorities. That's why Kim Klacik is running to replace the late Elijah Cummings and say, look at what's happened with Baltimore under Democratic control for 50 years. And that's why Trump is actually having an uptick in Black support, because many Blacks are saying our unemployment rates are better. We are doing better than before. Same with Hispanics, saying we are doing better. And then you have President Trump with prison reform. The Biden policies are part of what helps so many Blacks be wrongly incarcerated or unfairly incarcerated. The prison reform of Trump has helped relieve suffering for many Blacks. And by the way, a driving force behind that is Jared Kushner, because his father was in prison. And when Jared would visit him, he saw the disparities, he saw the inequities, and saw that something was wrong with the larger system. So President Trump has actually done something of tremendous substance to help the Black community in America. His standing with historic Black colleges. These are major things. These are major breakthroughs. And that's why, again, so many Blacks are saying, hey, we are standing with him. He's definitely getting an uptick in support. I read an article in New York Times that I cite in my book, Evangelicals at the Crossroads, that was before COVID, but it's saying, hey, we need to be very concerned because Trump is getting more and more popularity among Blacks because his economic policies and other policies are working. This is just grassroots. As for health care, that can really be debated. I think both parties say we want the best care for the maximum number of people, but what is best can be debated. Every doctor that I spoke with after Obamacare said it hurt them and it hurt their ability to care for people. Now, that's just anecdotal. But I know that there's a major debate over that, just like there's a major debate over global warming. If we know that there's something dangerous that can be worked against, then I think everyone together wants to work against those things. And yet there's massive debate. I mean, cooking the books in England, one of the key people involved committing suicide because of wrong information. There's a lot of debate about these things. I have zero expertise in which I can speak to this with authority in terms of global warming and what we are contributing to it as a human race and what can be done. All I'm saying is, from what I've studied and looked at, there are scientists arguing both of these things. We know the slaughter of the unborn is taking place. We know babies are being sliced up and sucked out of the womb. We know that laws are being passed so that if a baby is aborted and survives an abortion, no, sorry, don't get medical care. I mean, utter heart. We know that's taking place. We've got to deal with that. We've got to address that. The other issues are highly, highly debatable. And again, we don't know what Biden will do because he has shifted far to the left during the primaries to get the election. And we don't know exactly how strongly or clearly he will lead. We know that Kamala Harris has been one of the most liberal senators, and she could be the next president. Let's just see a couple other things to address quickly. Regarding COVID, yeah, it's a shame that we've had the deaths that we have. I don't know that in hindsight, if we started over, that we would do a whole lot better. WHO in England is saying no more lockdowns, no more shutdowns. They are causing more deaths than the disease. Australia, with their policies, I've read that there are now more suicides due to COVID than COVID deaths. And you've got countries like Britain and others, we're about number 10 in terms of world fatalities. You have others that are done much worse than us. Some of the problem in America has been Trump being who he is. Some of it has been that we've gotten mixed things. I mean, Anthony Fauci, wear a mask, don't wear a mask, wear a mask, don't wear a mask, going back and forth. Different states having different policies. It's been a bit of a mess. But everyone agrees it's a bad thing, and we're trying to figure out what's best to do, as opposed to something horrific like the shedding of the blood of the unborn. Something horrific like the stealing of our religious freedoms, with freedom being at the very foundation of our nation. Those are concrete things that we do know about. The idea of Republicans disenfranchising minorities, they may not have paid adequate attention to minorities in the past, but their policies ultimately could be argued to be in the best interest of all Americans, whereas the Democratic parties would continue to enslave with the welfare system and other things like that, and with intersectionality, and now you have a multiculturalism where you've got everybody kind of pulling against each other instead of trying to find ways to work together for the common good. And I believe ultimately, with all of Trump's failings, that is his desire to see America better for everybody. It's interesting, one quote pulled up about lazy blacks. Well, I mean, how many quotes do we want to pull up, about basket of deplorables or other things like this? We could have a quote battle, and that'll go on endlessly. But you have to look at the overall policies. And I have looked at cases where the voting arrangements or where things were broken down was specifically to help Democrats and specifically to get away from our system. So, sorry, I've gone slightly over 15 minutes here. But I think those things can be debated back and forth. But to me, the non-debatable things, the non-negotiable things, so black and white, so clear, that under no possible circumstances could a Christian in good conscience vote for Biden-Harris.
All right, so I want to say a couple things before we get into back and forth dialogue. So, Michael, I just wanted to say thank you for agreeing to do this. I know that I didn't give you all the information up front, but I appreciate you doing what you could in the time that you had. I thought you did a great job. I wasn't worried about it. All right, so that out of the way. So I wanted to also say that this debate that you've heard just now kind of explains my own position and why I'm so confused about politics. You have people like Dustin on the left arguing, I think, a really reasonable case. And then you hear Michael Brown, and the abortion thing is really what kind of just, it's difficult for me to vote Democrat when abortion is such a big issue, and that didn't really even feature in Dustin's argument or in at least the presentation. Which that's not to say he's not going to talk about it. I go ahead, Dustin.
Yeah. So I mean, one thing I want to say is that I did try to, on these debatable issues, I mean, no, global warming is not really debatable. I mean, there's an overwhelming scientific consensus, I think. But on these other issues, I mean, I did try to provide evidence, and I'm not sure that Michael really responded. I mean, he claimed again that Trump's policies have helped black people. I tried to show the economy did grow, but it doesn't seem like it grew because of his policies. It grew just exactly following the trend of the Obama administration. He just inherited a good economy. But there are a lot of things like that maybe we could go on about for a long time. But on abortion, first of all, there is no child killing option, no non-child killing option among the major two parties, right? Both parties are going to kill children, mostly children in other countries through bombing and so on. Again, we know that civilian casualties caused by American military action have risen under Trump. We know that that's happening. We know that the U.S. is supporting Saudi Arabia, a terrible dictatorship in a lot of ways, in this inhumane war in Yemen that is causing a huge humanitarian crisis that's killing all these people. So I think if you think no Christian can vote for someone who's going to kill children, then you shouldn't vote. And that's a defensible position, I think, but it doesn't mean that you should vote for Trump. Now, when it comes to abortion, all these things are highly debatable. I guess I'd want to know, Michael, is your view that we should do as much as we can to reduce the number of abortions, and that's the aim? Or is your view that we want legal restrictions on abortion for their own sake, even if that's not the path overall that results in the fewest abortions? Because it seems to me that it's highly debatable whether Republicans or Democrats in expectation are going to lead to fewer abortions overall. Republicans will maybe fight for certain legal restrictions. On the other hand, we know right now the abortion rate in the U.S. is lower than it was before Roe v. Wade. That's not because of legal restrictions. That's because of fewer unintended pregnancies, which is mostly because of better contraception and better contraceptive access. And it's Democrats, I think, who are going to do a better job on that front, both in the U.S. and, again, in many other countries. This is why, again, I said I think Trump's policies actually probably significantly increase the abortion rate worldwide. So I want to know, do you want, if it turned out that Democratic policies resulted in fewer abortions than Republican policies, would you support the Democrats then? Or would you still want the Republicans because you care about making it illegal for its own sake?
All right,
Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure. So let me respond in somewhat of the order that was mentioned. Global warming is one issue, man-made contribution to global warming and what are best steps to deal with that, that's another issue. And it is hotly debated. And again, I'm not expert in it, but I've read enough and seen enough of people who are highly qualified, highly respected worldwide that debate these issues. But we're not debating Kamala Harris's voting record when it comes to abortion. We're not debating Joe Biden's shift to the left when it comes to abortion. We're not debating that the Democrats are the shout your abortion party. We're not debating where the Democrats stand with Roe v. Wade. That's not debatable. And so you start there. Civilian casualties worldwide. Actually, Trump is doing his best to get our troops out. He's not started new wars overseas, and he's doing his best to get our troops out. If you want to talk about the children slaughtered in Syria under the Obama administration, and incredible.
I think that was bad too. We should talk about it.
If I could just. Right. So to say that the civilian casualties worldwide have increased under Trump, to me, is a completely outrageous statement.
But they have. Empirically, this is no. You can look. People should Google.
Okay. So under the Obama administration, we had Syria. Okay. We had Yemen. We had Libya under the Obama administration. The amount of civilian casualties then, just those, dwarfs anything that's happened in the Trump administration. Absolutely. And children killed. Absolutely. So, that's just, let anyone check that. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure that out. But when it comes to, in God's sight, when you have an unjust law, when you now find a constitutional right for abortion, that must be dealt with. That must be dealt. As we do that, many other things will fall into place. And the pro-life movement working day in, day out and presenting the reality and even this 3D and 4D ultrasound so people recognize the humanity of the baby in the womb. That is massively important. Now, if in your theoretical question, under Republican policies, laws would be changed, but abortions would be fewer, would stay the same. but under Democratic policies, abortions would be reduced, but the laws would stand. I would ultimately say then we work to change the Republican policies because the law must be addressed. An unjust, immoral law that sanctions the shedding of the blood of the unborn, which is over 60 million now. And if not for Roe v. Wade, it would not be a fraction of that number. The Supreme Court decision has been disastrous. So you must address that first and foremost. You are saying you want to vote for the people saying Roe v. Wade must be enshrined. You want to vote for potential President Kamala Harris, who says if a baby survives abortion, that baby cannot be guaranteed medical care. I don't see how there's any possible defensible argument in that favor.
Well, I mean, if your answer is that you would prefer the situation where it's illegal but there are more abortions, then that does change the calculus a little bit.
Well, no, because you can deal with the policies. In other words, you can get the Republicans to change the policy. I disagree with your thesis entirely.
Right,
it's like saying what if you have Hitler in power but have less Jews killed each year? I mean, and I'm not comparing anyone here to Hitler. I'm just saying I don't accept your argument anyway. To me, it's a contradictory. It's not an argument in reality.
Well, I mean, I've given reasons for thinking that. It seems like I'm not saying I know either way. I'm confused about why you think you know. Because what I'm saying is it seems quite possible.
Concrete things. In other words, we know what happened with Roe v. Wade. We know what the law is. We know that pro-life movement has been working tirelessly to push back.
I also think that we know that Trump's policies are increasing abortions in other countries by resulting in less contraception access, for instance.
That's a possible argument that you raised.
Well, there's a big academic literature on it.
And there's no contradictory academic literature on it. There's no pushback. Both of us are academics, and we both know that for every 10 papers you cite, I can cite 10. And for every 50 you cite, I can cite 50. So you have to really dig deep and really work through very complex issues with multiple factors. But there's nothing to dig through when it comes to the willful slaughtering of the unborn and a party that stands for that. You are voting for the party that says yes to Roe v. Wade, no to care for an aborted baby that survives the abortion. That's what we know for sure. The other stuff is hotly debated among academics, and surely you must know that.
Michael, let me ask a question real quick. Are you in favor? So going back to Dustin's question earlier, are you in favor? So suppose that the Democrats were going to lead to less abortions happening effectively and practically. Would you then vote Democrat?
So they
or is it
want
about the
to
laws?
stand. Well, first it's a false question. Could God make a rock too heavy to pick up? Okay, I mean it's purely theoretical and it has no bearing in reality from everything that I can see. So I don't know how a response to a non-real, purely theoretical question that contradicts everything we know is helpful. So that I'd have to think through which is in the best long-term interest, because just like the battle against slavery, certain things are done incrementally. The battle against racism, certain things are done incrementally. You accept something that's not ideal because it's going in the right direction. The Democrat policies, from everything I can see, increase abortion, the welfare system, the enshrining of poverty, the clinics in the poorer cities and things like that. You know, the black genocide, go to websites that talk about black genocide led by black leaders. They're all pro-life, they're all Republican. There's a reason for it. So as far as I can tell, the policies don't help. So
to me it sounds like you just want the least amount of abortions. And that I agree with that.
No, but not just the least amount of abortions.
He also wants
because here, let me give you an example. And then I need to shut up so Dustin can speak. Okay. If the Democrats staunchly stood for Roe v. Wade, but also strongly spoke against the nuclear family and said we just shouldn't be having children and get busy work, forget about sex, so the number of abortions drops because people are just copulating less. Is that what I'm going to vote for? Or am I going to vote for here are laws that will work against this, and now let's continue to change the hearts and minds of society. That's what I'm going to do. So ultimately, it's not just fewer abortions, it's long-term what will make this the way we want it to be. And that is definitely going to be with the pro-life, not with the pro-abortion.
Okay, that helps. That helps. Now, Dustin, before you answer that, I want to ask you a straightforward question as well. Do you think that abortion is wrong?
I think that early abortion, at least, is not wrong. And I think that because there's a big, there's been a big debate in the history of the church about when ensoulment occurs. I hold to Richard Swinburne's view. People watching might know who Richard Swinburne is. I hold to Richard Swinburne's view that in all likelihood, ensoulment probably doesn't occur until the fetus is capable of consciousness, which most people think probably around 20 weeks or so, maybe a little later. And so I don't think that personhood begins until quite late. Now, past that point, you have questions about bodily autonomy and so on, and about unexpected medical issues that might arise. It seems plausible to think that flippantly done late-term abortions are wrong. If it's in the case of some unexpected medical reason, then it seems much more justifiable. It seems quite likely to me that people, typically, if they want an abortion, you're not going to wait for 7 months and walk around pregnant and then go get one. Typically, late-term abortions are done because something has happened, like some unexpected medical reason. And so then there are questions about policy-wise how to respond to that. But I don't think that early abortions are wrong because I don't think that I think that I didn't exist until, some months into my mother's pregnancy.
Dustin, can I just ask a question of clarification there? Since we know that at the moment of conception, the baby's DNA and thus computer programming for their personhood takes place at conception, how is that baby not a person at that point? How does that baby not have personhood when it already has its DNA coding, its unique DNA coding?
I am not a materialist. I'm a substance dualist. I think that I'm not a material object. I think that I'm a soul. And so I think that I didn't exist until my soul came into being. Saying that my DNA began, certainly something happened at conception. Some very interesting biological process happened at conception. Some organism came to exist. I don't think that I'm an organism. I don't think that I'm an animal. I think that I'm a soul. So figuring out that an organism came to exist at that point doesn't tell me whether or not I came to exist at that point. Does that make sense?
Not really, because that sounds almost materialistic in the name of not being materialistic. But again, now if you're going to debate when the soul comes in, that becomes pure theory. There's nothing we can tie it into. Even if the baby could feel pain, what does it matter? It's still not a soul. You could say seconds before it comes out of the womb, it's still not a soul.
I think that any conscious individual has a soul, because I think the soul is responsible for consciousness. So once the fetus can feel pain, it follows that it has a soul then. But when I was, or when this body, this organism was, a few weeks old and didn't have a nervous system yet and so on, I think, again, like Richard Swinburne, that I probably was just not on the scene yet.
And any idea why the early church was so adamantly opposed to abortion?
Some of them thought that it was murder, and some of them didn't. So, for instance, Aquinas,
early church, I was asking.
Augustine, for instance, thought that ensoulment didn't happen until a ways in. He was influenced by Aristotelian philosophy here. So, I guess some of them, they were also against contraception. So some of them were against abortion for the same reason that they were against contraception, not because they thought contraception was murder, but because they thought it was unnatural or whatever. Others, I think, did think that it was murder. I don't think that there are clear theological or scriptural grounds for answering either way. I think it's a philosophical question.
So Psalm 139, where the psalmist talks about how God knit us together in the mother's womb, that's talking about material things and part of God's intricate creation of us. You have no problem with that, just for convenience sake, because we weren't careful sleeping together. I don't want to have a baby to rip that out of the womb that God formed. That's not a problem for you.
I think well, first of all, I mean, I think I did exist by the end of the pregnancy, so I was there in the womb at some point. But I also think it's very difficult. I think it's very dangerous to read too much into this sort of poetic language. I mean, the Bible also says things like, before the foundation of the world, I knew you. Now, of course, that can't mean that I existed 15 billion years before conception, right? Or there's some passage that I forget off the top of my head that says something like, as soon as I was born, I went astray, telling lies, and so on. Well, I mean, I didn't tell any lies when I was born, right? I couldn't talk yet. So I think, on the one hand, a literal reading of the passage doesn't quite defend. I mean, if I was being formed, I don't know. It doesn't say that I was there from the very beginning. I don't think that a literal reading of the passage establishes what you want it to establish, at least insofar as I can tell. But I also think it's dangerous to read the passage literally because it's poetry of a sort that we find in many other places where, you would get odd results if you read it literally.
Right, but knowing biblical scholarship, then you know what the purpose of that poetry is. And Psalm 139 is not even talking about the issue of the soul. It's talking about God intricately forming us in the womb, whether it's poetically or not. It's the beauty of his intricate knitting of us together in the womb. And abortion sucks that out or burns that alive or slices that up. That's an affront, a willful attack on God's creation. When we look at this destiny, 2 nations are in your womb. This is what Rebecca finds out when she's pregnant. Because they are already seen their destiny. That's the meaning of, say, Jeremiah 1 or Galatians 1, where Jeremiah, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. In other words, before you even created, and it begins within the womb, I had selected you and had a purpose for you. Paul speaks of being chosen from his mother's womb. So personhood in other scriptures is established that those are, and this is not late in a pregnancy in every case. This is established in God's sight, that's a human being. It's already got its coding. He now is intricately unpacking this amazing biological design, second by second by second by second. And again, the bottom line is, I do think, honestly, Dustin, and I respect the fact that you wrestle with these issues and that you care about the poor and the marginalized and think your views are best. But I think, honestly, if you shared my views on abortion, then it would tip the scales. You wouldn't be able to make that alliance with your enemies that you speak of. So I'm not. Yes, I categorically differ with you.
Look, I voted third party in 2016. So in 2016, I didn't make the alliance with my enemies. So I feel very much the force of thinking, look, maybe you should just sit it out, or you should try to protest or whatever. Because again, I think both parties do things that are quite bad. I think that if you think that, you shouldn't vote for Trump either, because I also think that Trump does things that are quite bad. My inclination, I guess, is to think that sort of the stakes are high enough in this case for, I think, the future, our future generations as they're affected by climate change, for our democratic institutions, so on, for all these other things that I mentioned, that it can justify making the alliance with the bad folks. But I'm not going to begrudge people who protest vote or whatever, because again, I do think that both sides are quite bad. I think we're in a bad
Dustin, I've got a question
situation.
for you, and then I've got a question for Michael, and I think that might end us. We're probably going to end the show after these 2 questions. So, Dustin, the question for you is, which party do you think has the best chance of limiting or lowering late-term abortions?
I mean, maybe Republicans, because they might institute more legal restrictions, I guess. I mean, it's a bit hard to know. I guess I think that, late term abortions they're comparatively small in number. Maybe there are 10,000 or so of them. Some of those, I think, are probably morally justified, or at least there are extenuating circumstances because there are medical issues or whatever. Some of them are going to happen anyway, either illegally or because people cross the border or whatever. So if you take whatever proportion of these you think are wrong, I don't know, maybe none of them are because they all have some good reason, but some proportion maybe is wrong. You take this proportion that's wrong, and you ask, in order to prevent a few thousand murders or something, or a few hundred murders, should we sort of absorb these other costs? that I think Republican policies have. I don't think that that's a good decision. I mean, so that's why I guess I'm not moved by maybe what the person is thinking when they ask that question.
Any thoughts on that, Michael?
Yeah, well, we know for a fact that the Republicans would be the party that would reduce late-term abortions. We know that from policies they've been putting forward, from what different states are putting forward, and we know it's the Democrats that oppose it. And where you have Democratic justices or appointed justices, they oppose it. So we know that pretty much for a fact. But to minimize the horror of late-term abortions, when, again, you can't find anything in the Bible that God hates more. I mean, you get past idolatry, that basic issue.
There's almost nothing about abortion.
The shedding of the blood of children, and you don't get any closer to that than, and Jesus talking about the least of these, the ones that are the most defenseless. So, late-term abortions is just that. And look, the fact is, if the argument is, well, that child is going to be severely handicapped and suffer terribly, why don't we then have the baby be born? Once we're sure that's the case, then execute it, because we all recognize that's immoral. It's no less immoral to do it 30 seconds before the baby is born. These are deeply painful situations where we must have great compassion, but the solution is not to kill. The solution is always to go the way of life.
So I've got one last question. I know Michael has got to go. As you can see, he's in a hotel room, so he's got other things to do. And I appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to do this with us. So here's my question for you. You may not like it because it's kind of hypothetical, but here's the question. Suppose that both parties were against abortion, or that abortion was just not the issue. What party would you vote for then?
Based on the other issues, freedom of religion, pushing back against cancel culture, mobocracy, standing with Israel, pushing back against Islamic terrorism, international tyranny, and who I would think would have the better overall economic policies, I would vote Republican. But Trump being who he is, my concerns with Trump are very different than Dr. Crummett's, interestingly. They have to do with who he is and the.
I have those worries too.
I'm sure, but in your presentation, you dealt with other substantive issues of importance to you. So I don't mean it by way of criticism, sir. I just mean it by way of different emphases. If they were equal on abortion, I would still vote Republican for these other issues, but the possibility of sitting out an election or voting third party would be easier. But in reality, those other things are really big. And if the Democrat Party, if it was the party of, say, Bill Clinton, as opposed to the party of today and some of the radicalism in it, then I could be tempted to sit out an election because of my issues with the person of Trump. But again, where we've seen things go with mobocracy and cancel culture and a socialist philosophy, again, not talking economy as much, Israel, freedom of religion, pushing back against radical LGBTQ extremism, international tyranny, Islamic terrorism, I'd still vote Republican, but with a little less enthusiasm.
All right, Dustin.
Even then, just this last thing, I constantly say that Donald Trump is not our savior, that 4 more years of Donald Trump is not going to save America. I wrote a whole book with the title Donald Trump is Not My Savior. I end evangelicals at the crossroads by saying we must put the cross before the flag and spiritual activity before political activity. And we must be holistic in our approach, in our pursuit of justice. And we must regain our prophetic voice. And we must prioritize the Great Commission. And repentance must begin with the church because of our multitude of sins and hypocrisies. So I want to be very clear on that. The president gets my vote, but only a vote. My heart, my soul, my devotion, those belong to the Lord. And I put very little trust overall in the political system to bring about the deepest changes that we desire. And perhaps Dr. Crummett and I have similar views when it comes to not looking to government to bring about all the changes we desire to see.
All right, so we're out of time. So what I want to do is just quick closing statements. So Dustin, give me about 60 seconds of your thoughts, and then we'll go to Michael.
Doesn't he get to respond, though? He didn't get a chance to respond.
He's going to have to throw it in with his closing, unless you've got more time.
No,
I want to respect your time.
No, I want to be fair. I can go a couple more minutes, and then I've got to cut off, got to do my own radio show. But
Okay.
I want to be fair. Yeah.
Oh, right. Yeah, well, I mean, I agree that there are many things that cannot be solved through government action. And of course, broadly, both religious hope and a lot of our hope for improving society now, have to be has to rest and stuff other than that. Yeah, I mean, I guess to sum up, I think that I think that Republican policies cause a huge amount of death, a huge amount of suffering. I've tried to provide reasons for that. People, again, can look at the slides and follow up references. I think the main difference between us, between myself and Dr. Brown, is on abortion, probably. Partly on this issue of, partly on the moral status of abortion in general, though partly also on this issue of whether what matters is reducing abortions or also outlawing them. I know that we have an empirical disagreement here. I will say I would be interested if people can find me studies that suggest that the Mexico City policy significantly reduces the abortion rate. Everything I'm aware of suggests it may have different effects in different regions, but on balance, it probably increases them. So I don't see good reasons to think that Republican policies would. I don't see good reasons to think that they would result in fewer abortions worldwide. I think that many of the abortions that they would ban are morally justified, and so it would actually be wrong to ban them. I think that there's some, very small number of abortions that are arguably wrong. Maybe it depends on the empirical situation, but the government might not be very well positioned to situate that. I don't think that submitting to all of these other ills, including things that kill lots of children in, for instance, the developing world, whatever, I don't think that doing that in the name of trying to, ferret out the small number that you think might be wrong, also at the expense of putting huge burdens on women who, are maybe carrying pregnancies they're not going to survive and so on, late term. I don't think that that's justified. And so I think that that is sort of the biggest difference between us. So I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, so thank you, and I appreciate the time and effort you've put into this. Again, we know that 99% of all abortions are not related to rape, incest, or the health of the mother. We're talking about what we know of the slaughter of 750,000 unborn in the womb every year, enhanced by our laws and enhanced by the laws that Democrats want to stand for. I encourage everyone, the moment this debate is done, to just type in online images of aborted babies. Just spend a minute just looking, just a minute. And you tell me if those are human beings, if those are little people, if those are ones that God deeply cares about. We do know that Trump policies work for prison reform, help the economic status of blacks and Hispanics, even if it was just a general curve with everyone. And that's why, again, there's been an increase in support for blacks and Hispanics. It'll be interesting to see how the vote actually goes, where different minorities can speak for themselves in terms of their view of things. But a lot of the international things are debatable, but even what decisions other countries make, that's not our call ultimately. Our call is to say what we support and what we don't support. The issue of freedom of religion, massively important, and I heard no pushback to my position on that. The importance of standing with Israel, especially from a biblical perspective, and the potential good for the entire Middle Eastern region, that's major. Standing up to the Chinas of this world and what that means for religious minorities and people suffering, that's massive. So for major existential reasons, pushing back against the radical socialist cancel culture mobocracy, which would transform America as we fundamentally know it, those are big. Those are very big issues. So that, with abortion at the top of the list, is why I say, yeah, I'll vote for Trump more enthusiastically than I did in 2016. He's lived up to my worst fears in terms of his character and the way he conducts himself and the chaos that he can bring. On the flip side, he's done way more than I thought he would do in terms of keeping his promises, which is also a matter of character. And those things I think are important as well. That being said, I'll say it once more, he's not my savior. Only Jesus gets that adoration and devotion.
There's so many more things I would love to talk about, but we've got to end it there. So thank you guys for coming on. This has been a great discussion. Also, think about how this discussion compared to the presidential debates that happened recently. There was a little interrupting, but it wasn't anything like what we saw there. So awful, so terrible. Okay, well, thank you guys for coming on.
Thanks for hosting it, and thank you, Dr. Crummett.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, so I just want to talk to the audience real quick. Thank you guys for tuning in today. It's been awesome. This was a great little dialogue. If you'd like to support this ministry, head over to patreon.com/capturingchristianity. Link to that is in the description of this video. You can support this ministry for any amount that you'd like. And if you support us at $10 a month, you can get 12 apologetics courses for beginners. And Dr. Dustin Crummett is one of the teachers for this one. He talked on the argument from moral knowledge and the argument from consciousness. Both of those were amazing. They were super, super cool. And so I say that this is like a course for beginners, but it's actually a course for anyone. If you're intermediate or even if you're advanced, you're going to get a ton out of this course. So for $10 a month of supporting this ministry, you can get access to all 12 of these courses. And just pause it if you want to look at the list, or just head over to patreon.com/capturingchristianity and pledge your support there to get access to all 12 of these. Anyways, thank you guys for tuning in today. We'll see you in the next live stream. And remember, Christianity is true. See ya.